Generally, next steps on a sim is to go into braking. There's a lot of time to gain and there's a lot of time to lose in the braking zones. People almost brush past it and don't take too much notice of it. They think, oh, it's a braking zone, it's, you know, we're slowing down. There's, you know, the general kind of perception is that there's not much time to gain or lose, but it's massive. And it's very easy time as well. If you get the technique right, because it's all technique, there's, the likes of Daniel Ricciardo, for example, is a driver who does it really, really well. And that's where a lot of his time is found on the lap. So yeah, there's big differences between braking on the road versus braking on the circuit. On the road, you know, if you've got your kids and your family in the back, you're not going to be smashing on the brakes at every traffic lights. You're going to be gradually applying the brakes nice and softly. Generally, if you're driving a manual, only with your right foot. That's another difference to the track, is that people use their left foot to brake, because you don't have to use a clutch generally in a lot of these modern day sports cars. So the big kind of adaptation is when you hit the brakes initially, you want that initial hit of the brakes to be really hard. Basically, as hard as you could possibly brake before you lock up the wheels. And the later you can brake, the better, because in theory, you're accelerating for a longer period of time. But yeah, we're going to focus on basically braking nice and hard, nice and sharp, straight away, gradually bleeding off the brakes as we turn in, and just basically using the maximum of the brakes and tyres into a corner. And it's a massively beneficial tool to be able to understand why the car's responding in the way it does into the braking zones, and using it in a way that, you know, can benefit you to be able to turn in more, reduce understeer, induce oversteer, all this sort of stuff. So it's an incredible tool, more than just slowing the car down. And this is generally what we actually encourage on a sim, is to do something like you've just done there, where you find the limits in both ways, because now you have a feel for where that limit of the brakes are. It's the beauty of a sim. You don't have to spend $3 grand on a new set of tyres after doing the lap you've just done. They're not like 50p pieces, so that's the nice bit. But now what we're going to focus on is having a very similar initial pressure to that lap you've just done, where it's very high pressure. But rather than maintaining that pressure the whole time, it's a gradual bleed off straight away. You think you want almost like, imagine you're almost kind of punching the brakes. So it's a big hit and then you straight off straight away, and just maintaining a steady pressure that's gradually decreasing as you turn in. So almost think in your head that the brakes and the steering work hand in hand. So as you hit the brakes, at the highest pressure, your steering is going to be the straightest it'll be.
Cool.
As you gradually bleed off the brakes, that's as you slowly apply the steering lock. In the same sense that when you apply the throttle again, as you increase the throttle, you open up the steering again. So everything's working together, basically. It's one big motion. So this lap, focus on hitting the brakes really hard with your steering straight. As you turn in, bleed off the brakes gradually to the point where you're at the apex, you're just off the brakes, and then you back to the throttle again. I mean, this is a perfect example now on the screen of a road car trace versus a race car trace. The white trace being the road car one, you can see that it's a very long braking period, so you're slowing down for a very long time. Essentially, you're just losing time there. All you're doing is prolonging the time that you're decelerating. Your competitor, he's going to be accelerating for another 30, 40, probably 50 metres more than you. He's only building more of a gap, which is more time. So yeah, you can see two very different techniques. And then we look at the race, almost like the racing driver technique, which is the red trace. That's perfect. That's a kind of, we'd want a little bit more of a sudden hit. You know, you'd want that initially for it to be a little bit higher peak, but that there is a very good trace. You've got the peak and then you've got the gradual bleed off. And we can fine tune it. So, you know, if I was coaching in a session where we're trying to say reduce lockups or encourage less understeer, I'd say, okay, hit the brakes a little bit harder initially and just kind of gradually bleed out to a very low pressure and just maintain that low pressure for a little bit longer. And then you can see as well, because you've braked far more efficiently, you're also able to get back to full power much sooner. So you're back to full power very early compared to the other lap. You gain 3/10, which is a huge chunk in racing. You know, 3/10 is the difference between first and 10th sometimes, you know.
Thank you for watching. If you want to book your own session in SimTrack, follow the link in the description below.